Jesper Olsen received a goal kick from his keeper and stepped over the ball as if to jolt off at pace to find a second goal in the 1986 FIFA World Cup last 16 with Spain. This wasn't the plan. The plan was that the exciting wide midfielder would return the ball to Lars Haw in net for a simple back pass and a restarting of play late in the first half in the Estadio Le Corregidora in Querétaro. Instead, Olsen opted to play the ball back to Haw with a trickier pass once he had evaded his pressing Spanish opponent. It didn't reach his pale-shirted compatriot, but instead the deadliest of his Roja-coloured counterparts, Emilio Butragueño. The Real Madrid attacker didn't need a touch. Spain levelled things up inside 43 minutes, and by the end of proceedings, they had thrashed Denmark 5-1. The world was shocked, stunned into silence. The neutrals' favourite, and some people's actual favourite to win the 1986 World Cup, had been slain. The same scoreline today would barely muster a wrinkled brow amongst football fans. In 1986, it devastated millions of neutrals. A team so celebrated that World Soccer in 2008 named them the 16th greatest football team of all time. How did that happen? Let's find out. (1879) dawned with the formation of the oldest football team in continental Europe, as Copenhagen's Bold Club came to being. 4 years later came the first official football match in Denmark before the DBU was set up in 1889, the Danish equivalent to the FA. 1904 saw to Denmark participating in the founding of FIFA, and gold was won at the Intercalated Games, a 10th anniversary celebration of the inaugural Summer Olympics. Such was their half-time lead, 9-0, that their opponents forfeited without a second 45. Silver followed at subsequent Olympics in London in 1908 and in Stockholm in 1912, and Paul Nielsen was revered as Denmark's first great player. So great that his 52 goals in 38 appearances up to 1920 remains the joint record today, alongside John Dahl Tomasson. It seemed nothing could stop Denmark, until Spain stunned them 1-0 in the first round of the 1920 Olympics, the beginning of a quirky trend between the two teams. Denmark slipped back into the international hibernation of amateurism. By the time FIFA organised its first World Cup in 1930, Denmark remained housed in their wilderness. They'd pop back in to show their face every now and then, returning to competition at the 1948 London Olympics to win bronze. Perhaps the Olympics' amateur status could afford Denmark some success. Moreover, in defeating Italy 5-3, Danish football came into view of Serie A clubs. Italy's professionalisation held enough sway that saw 10 players depart for Serie A. Instantly, like so many who followed, Danish defectors were banned from returning to the national team. 1958 saw the FIFA World Cup come to Scandinavia for its first and so far only edition. This prompted Denmark to cobble together an attempt to qualify. While Sweden would reach the final, Denmark lost all of their qualifiers and wouldn't return to qualification until the 1964 European Championships. That year would be Denmark's maiden professional tournament. This was no measure of their progress, however. In defeating Malta, Albania and Luxembourg in an unseeded qualifying path, Denmark still broke sweat in needing 3 legs to defeat the latter to make the semi-final. They returned home with their tails tucked between their legs, shipping 6 goals in defeats to the Soviet Union and Hungary, finishing 4th of 4 teams. Denmark's qualification record as mere amateurs was to be expected. In 40 qualification matches for tournaments between 1964 and 1978, Denmark won just 7 and were only dredged off the foot of qualification groups for the 1970 and 78 World Cups. Times were changing, however, as professionals slowly seeped into the national team. The first time the DBU allowed paid footballers came in 1971, without much ringing endorsement as they were thrashed 5-0 by Portugal. With many of the Danish national team playing professionally and therefore abroad, they struggled to collect a strong enough team together for international windows. Debutants of the late 1970s included a core of what would become collectively known as Danish Dynamite. Frank Arnesen and Soren Lerby, however, turned out for Ajax, and Morten Olsen and Preben Elkjaer sought Belgium out, and the national team struggled to maintain a consistency. However, it did not stop Denmark pulling that team together. Frank Arnesen was an incredible dribbler of the ball, a proponent of the mazy run. He plied his trade entirely outside of Denmark for Ajax, Valencia, Anderlecht and PSV. He earned 52 caps for the national team. Soren Lerby, another Ajax alum, also saw action in Munich, Monaco and Eindhoven across an illustrious 15-year career. An insanely dedicated professional in a box-to-box midfield role that demanded high energy levels. He played 67 times for Denmark. Morten Olsen was the midfield general who led by example, and after a tactical switch as well as earning the captaincy, dropped into the sweeper role. Twice Danish Player of the Year, Olsen played 102 times for his country while spending 14 years of his career in Belgium. Preben Elkjaer was the Dynamite's vivid young talent. Cheeky off the pitch but with a keen eye for a goal, he net 38 times in 69 matches for his country. He bookended his career with spells in his homeland but was ultimately the most successful in Hellas Verona. In that time, Elkjaer ranked in the top 4 of the Ballon d'Or nominees between 1984 and 86. Alan Simonsen, however, would earn that accolade, doing so in 1977, and he remains Denmark's only winner of the Ballon d'Or. He also holds the distinction of being the only scorer of UEFA's 3 competitions: the European Cup, UEFA Cup and Cup Winners' Cup. 20 goals in 55 games for his country, Simonsen's club career was marked by a decade at Borussia Mönchengladbach and Barcelona before a curious year at Charlton Athletic. Klaus Berggren and Jens Jorg Bertelsen were the 2 trusty midfielders who were late in moving abroad but nonetheless were key cogs in the Danish machine in Mexico. Jesper Olsen, nicknamed the Flea for his propensity to skip around the field of play and hurdle in challenges from opponents, ultimately played the tragic role in Denmark's 1986 demise. Olsen played 43 times for his country, as well as turning out for Ajax and Manchester United. And finally, Michael Laudrup, perhaps the greatest footballer that the nation of Denmark has produced. He crept into the Danish Dynamite team in his teens and was its last survivor, hanging up his boots after the 1998 World Cup and 104 appearances. The manager who dragged Denmark kicking and screaming into the new age of professionalisation, Kurt Nielsen. Hired as manager in January 1976, Nielsen started off hot, claiming if Denmark can't win the World Cup with me, then they'll never win it. Nielsen's time as national coach can be characterised as lenient but incredibly fun, instilling an all-out attacking ethos. He incentivised fun too, allowing players to let off steam. One example being after a 4-1 World Cup qualifying defeat in Poland, forcing players to go to a local nightclub. Sometimes it was so ridiculous it was funny, stated striker Jan Sorensen of Nielsen's reign as national manager. They weren't getting anywhere, amateurish in nature despite their vibrant football. Nielsen's final game as national manager was a 2-1 defeat to the Soviet Union, an enjoyable game played in his spirit of the sport. His successor, meanwhile, watched on from the sidelines. Local brewer Carlsberg was willing to pump money into the DBU to raise the standards of the sport nationally, and that included finding a professional coach. Enter Sepp Piontek. A Bundesliga winner with Werder Bremen, turned out 203 times in the league as a defender before being promoted to the role of manager. In this role, he had a habit of snapping up cheap Danish talent, most notably Per Rontved. 4 years of mid-table football at Werder became another mid-table season at Fortuna Düsseldorf, before Haitian money came calling and 2 years was spent coaching their national team. The Caribbean outfit had qualified for the 1974 World Cup and they wanted to go again. Unfortunately, a world of voodoo, witchcraft and not exactly above-board practices saw to the end of the German in Hershey. Battle-hardened by his time on the other side of the Atlantic, Piontek returned to West Germany with St. Pauli before taking on the mantle of the Denmark national team. Skepticism and stereotypes in hot pursuit, given his nationality in the post-war haze. The DBU, however, declared their trust in Piontek by abolishing the selection committee and gifting the West German full autonomy. In close proximity, both geographically and in time, Denmark's main influences were the total football style that adorned Ajax and the Netherlands, especially as so many Danes flocked to the Eredivisie to play in Amsterdam. Jesper Olsen, a sister of the famous penalty scored by Johan Cruyff that was attempted by the likes of Robert Pires, Thierry Henry and Arsenal some decades later, to varying results. Another pertinent influence is the mighty Anderlecht side, led by Tomislav Ivic, who were supremely successful in the mid-1980s, both continentally and domestically. Ivic's Anderlecht tactically fit Denmark's eventual system more. The manager deployed a sweeper system with Morten Olsen in the aforementioned role after a series of injuries forced his retreat from midfield. Anderlecht pressed like maniacs. Denmark would press like maniacs. Anderlecht held an aggressively high defensive line, so did Denmark, and somewhere along the way, Sepp Piontek was credited with the invention of the 3-5-2 with wingbacks who performed like wingers. Morten Olsen would hover ever so slightly behind the defensive duo of Ivan Nielsen and Søren Busk, whilst Jens Jorn Bertelsen was deployed as a holding midfielder and Klaus Berggren next to him knitted the defence and attack together. The other six positions were merely fluid, with Michael Laudrup and Preben Elkjaer often utilised up front, and the likes of Jan Molby, Jon Eriksson, Søren Lerby and Frank Arnesen, as well as Alan Simonsen and Jesper Olsen, drifted. By 1978, both Jägermeister and Carlsberg were on board to create a cocktail that tasted like a professional Danish league. 2 million kroner per year for 4 years was spent in creating the division. Fully professional, with a professional coach, Denmark came out swinging in the 1980s. Piontek would lose his first 5 competitive games towards the end of Euro 1980 qualifying, but a 3-1 victory in Spain, in Cadiz no less, breathed hope into the squad. To distance himself from the nation's amateurish past, Piontek was prone to culling important players, from starting centre-forward Jan Sorensen to his best goalkeeper Birger Jensen for insolence. Piontek ruled strongly to professionalise the team. He stripped away luxury from international breaks, introduced hardship that toughened the team up. 1981 saw 8 wins in 9 for the Danish national team. The one loss in that sequence, a defeat to Yugoslavia, which ultimately cost them their place at the 1982 World Cup. They did manage to topple Italy in Copenhagen in that campaign, however, and by July 1982 were known as the only team to inflict defeat on the Azzurri in either qualifying or the main tournament. The corner was slowly turned. The players' temperament was constantly being questioned by Piontek, and it soon came to a head prior to Euro 1984's qualification. The manager introduced a fine system, as well as a curfew. On the first night of the new rules, Piontek waited in the hotel lobby for players to return. When only a smattering did, Piontek could be found marching to the local nightclub at 3 a.m, ordering his players back to the hotel. Fines were collated and eventually spent on lavish gifts for players on their birthdays. But with the newly introduced discipline, lavish gifts earned from fines soon merely became a chocolate bar. Piontek had his team controlled. His team had Piontek relaxed. All in good time for Euro 1984. Qualifying for the 8-team championships was not a walk in the park. Well, Luxembourg were. Greece, however, had participated at the previous Euros and Hungary had just returned from the World Cup. That's without mentioning England, who had returned to the swing of things internationally under Ron Greenwood, whilst the European Cup had taken up a semi-permanent residency in the country between 1977 and 1982. Of these 5 teams, only one would qualify for France. Without Morten Olsen, Allan Simonsen and Frank Arnesen, Denmark welcomed favourites England to Copenhagen. Denmark may well have played better, but 2 scrappy goals from Trevor Francis earned the Three Lions a point. In Jesper Olsen's mesmeric equaliser, however, came yet another catalyst to light the Danish fuse. The return fixture the following year at Wembley was tantalising. Denmark had won 3 qualifiers on the bounce, whilst England had dropped points at home to Greece. Denmark had tricky trips to Budapest and Athens. The victor, therefore, in London would have control over the group. The only adjective that the England manager could find for Denmark was formidable, when he oversaw Denmark's friendly victory over France thanks to a Michael Laudrup brace. Another fuse lit to the increasing stockpile of Dynamite. 80% of all Danes were said to have watched their 1-0 victory at Wembley, courtesy of Allan Simonsen's penalty. Laudrup followed his France brace with 3 more against Luxembourg, as England kept the pressure on with a win in Budapest, only for Denmark to lose in the same NEP Stadion to the same Hungary a month later. The final set of fixtures boiled down to Denmark equalling England's result. The Three Lions sauntered to a 4-0 win in Luxembourg, whilst Preben, Elkjaer and Allan Simonsen bagged Denmark's goals to secure qualification. They headed into the tournament, though, in a slump, thanks to a poor run of friendlies and an inability to cobble together the majority of their team. By the time 30,000 Danes travelled south to France, the squad was back. Frank Arnesen after 2 years of persistent injuries, whilst Ole Vist grabbed hold of the number 1 jersey. First up were the hosts, a match marred twofold. Allan Simonsen suffered a horrific leg break and Michel Platini fluked a late deflected winner beyond Vist. They'd soon explode, thrashing Yugoslavia 5-0 to allay fears of profligacy after only 3 goals in their previous 6. Superior goal difference left Denmark needing a point from an ill-tempered all-or-nothing Strasbourg contest with Belgium. Belgium, the previous finalists, and a team who were populated by a host of Anderlecht's golden generation. Pressure told as Jan Koelemans and Francois Vercauteren sent Belgium into a 2-goal lead, only for Frank Arnesen's penalty immediately after, leaving the game on a knife edge. Enter Kenneth Brill, with his first touch of tournament football on the hour to pull Denmark back into parity. Preben Elkjaer rubbed salt into Belgian wounds with an exquisite chip over the goalkeeper. A late Spanish win over the West Germans granted them access to Denmark in the Lyon semi-final. For the superstitious among Danes, their use of a white kit that they hadn't won in 2 years was enough to deem the match a defeat before kick-off. However, it was the so-called lottery of the penalty shootout that would eliminate Denmark. Preben Elkjaer unfortunately sent his kick over the bar before Manuel Sarabia's subsequent penalty dispatched Spain into the final. There wasn't long to rue another Spanish defeat. Mexico was appearing on the horizon. Several clubs pounced on the profitable Danes of 1984. Jesper Olsen and Jan Molby were away to the English Football League and to Manchester United and Liverpool respectively. Preben Elkjaer signed for Hellas Verona and improbably won Serie A in his first season, whilst many were hugely successful still for Anderlecht. Not much changed for Denmark, only expectations were raised. Another tough qualifying campaign would grant 2 qualifiers from a pool that included themselves, Norway, Ireland, Switzerland and the Soviet Union. Profligacy in defeat against Switzerland and only a 1-0 win over Norway didn't punish Denmark. It was a tight group where every side took points off one another. Denmark's 4-2 victory over the Soviet Union in June 1985 became the stuff of legend between the 2 burgeoning outfits. Their first win over the Soviets was another catalyst to go alongside victories over Italy, France and England. A goalless draw with Switzerland, however, left all 5 teams separated by just 3 points with 2 match days remaining. What's more, Denmark trailed Norway at half-time in the subsequent game off the back of 6 hours without a goal. Then, The ball tumbled into the Norwegian net 5 times in 22 minutes, and Denmark subsequently triumphed 4-1 in Dublin to secure a spot in their first World Cup. Of the group his Uruguayan team had been drawn into, Omar Borras branded it El Grupo de la Muerte, the group of death. The former two-time champions were lumped in with fellow two-time champions West Germany, a competitive Scotland, and a Denmark team listed as one of the favourites. The mood was good. Recept 10, the official song for the World Cup, became the biggest selling Danish pop single of all time. But since it's Denmark, things could never truly be plain sailing. Jan Molby was heavily fatigued from a double winning season with Liverpool. Per Freeman suffered an ankle injury that practically ended his career, and Ole Vist was ruled out of the group phase with an ear infection. Only the South American might of Brazil, Argentina and Uruguay, as well as European champions France, were given a better chance of winning the tournament though than Denmark. Scotland provided a tough opponent but won with a more tumultuous preparation than Denmark's, given Jock Stein's sudden death upon qualification in Cardiff, as well as the withdrawals of key players Alan Hansen and Kenny Dalglish. Preben Elkjaer netted the only goal after a trademark run. Meanwhile, West Germany and Uruguay drew, handing the initiative to the Danes. The initiative they certainly took, smashing a brutish Uruguay, the reigning South American champions. Ivan Nielsen won the individual battle with the Celeste star man Enzo Francescoli, and Denmark matched Soviet Union's 6-goal barrage of Hungary 6 days prior with a 6-1 demolition job over the two-time champions. With both Denmark and West Germany qualified ahead of their final matchday tussle, several narratives sprouted up. Could there be a repeat of the disgrace of Hee-Hon of 4 years prior? Would Sepp Piontek allow his countrymen to waltz past them? Denmark, for all intents and purposes, were made favourites and confirmed that tag with Jesper Olsen's penalty and John Eriksen's second, which confirmed the 2-0 win. All had gone swimmingly until the 88th minute, when Frank Arnesen lashed out at Lothar Matthäus with a foot. Arnesen, who was running on fumes after spending 2 nights by his meningitis-stricken wife's bedside, was red-carded and would miss the last 16. Denmark received Spain as a gift for winning the group, whilst West Germany played Morocco. A harder task for the Danes, but they benefited from avoiding the likes of France, Italy and Brazil in their half of the draw. Many salivated over the prospect of a repeat of the qualifying contest with a now Valery Lobanovsky-led Soviet Union in the quarter-final. Until Belgium spoiled that party by winning 4-3. With that, however, the path to a potential semi-final with Argentina was laid bare for all to see. Denmark had a day's extra rest. They got to remain in their base at Querétaro too. All should have gone to plan, and was, when Jesper Olsen converted a first-half penalty. Then the fateful back pass to Emilio Butragueño that dragged Denmark back down to La Roja's level, and it arrived just in time for the half-time break. It would be easy to deduce from a mere glance at the history records that Spain then simply routed Denmark 5-1 in the second half. However, the Danes had chances to put the game to bed before Butragueño struck again on 56 minutes. Preben Elkjaer, often prolific in a red shirt, wasted 2 golden chances. After Spain surged into the lead, marking the first time Denmark had trailed in a World Cup game, Sepp Piontek got spooked on the touchline. The 3-5-2 had almost become a 2-3-5 in attempting to wrestle back control. Then, with the baking midday heat, Spain capitalised on Danish naivety. A counter led to the awarding of a Spanish penalty on the hour, which Andoni Goicoechea converted before Emilio Butragueño added goals 4 and 5 with transitional moves that put the Jules Rimet trophy beyond Denmark. Who was to blame then? It certainly wasn't Jesper Olsen for that lackadaisical pass that gave up Denmark's first half lead, and it wasn't Lothar Matthäus' fault for making a meal out of Frank Arnesen's challenge that ruled the Dane out of the last 16. It wasn't Arnesen's fault either, even though he would have been deployed on the right, where Olsen played that hospital pass to Butragueño. The blame could be laid with Sepp Piontek for going too gung-ho too early in the game, with still 30 minutes to play. It could also be attributed to the heat, the midday kickoff and Denmark's aged defence that was a combined 90 plus years of age. But, to quote a Carlsberg slogan, probably it was Denmark being Denmark. Is it worth sacrificing your style and identity for one win? After all, Belgium would have had 3 days rest on a weary Denmark team in the quarter-finals, and Diego Maradona's Argentina were the potential semi-final opponents. It might have proved a step too far, and all that remains is a glorious failure for the ages. Denmark would hold the distinction alongside Germany of qualifying for every European Championship between 1984 and 2004. The Dynamite, though, was quickly fizzled out, despite Denmark's qualification for Euro 88. They scored just 4 goals in qualifying and fell to 3 defeats and a group phase exit in West Germany. The first 2 World Cup qualifying campaigns of the 1990s brought final day failures to qualify against Romania and Spain, as the class of 86 was soon frittered away. Sepp Piontek resigned in February 1990 and Michael Laudrup retired internationally, aged only 26, as part of a failed qualification for Euro 92. Until it wasn't. Denmark were handed a reprieve thanks to Yugoslavia's disqualification and, on 11 days' notice, won the nation's sole trophy. Less Dynamite, more a disappointing sparkler on a wet bonfire night, as Denmark's football barely scraped them out of a group phase, and their incessant usage of Peter Schmeichel for a back pass was a vehicle for the subsequent law change. Michael Laudrup would return, and to form too, guiding Denmark to the World Cup quarter-final of 1998, bidding goodbye to football with a 3-2 defeat against Brazil. He was the last remaining component of Danish Dynamite. In the 21st century, knockout stage football has become an all-too rare unicorn, after last 16 exits to England and Croatia at the World Cups of 2002 and 2018. However, under the harshest of duress at Euro 2020, Denmark rekindled some of the 1980s fire and combined it with a sprinkling of 1992 success. They exited at the semi-final stage against England after they had lost their best player Christian Eriksen, and along with it, their opening 2 games. The unity found in hardship and under manager Kasper Hjulmand may yet usher in a new period of Danish delights.